Hello, we are here with Jonah Dempsey. How's it going, Jonah?
It's going well. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to have you. Nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you. Yeah. So,
Same.
yeah,
Likewise.
I know you have a YouTube channel. I watched a couple of your videos. You're doing lots of typology stuff.
I just started the YouTube channel with typology about 3 weeks ago, so it's all
Oh,
very
wow.
new.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Nice. Okay, and so you've been in typology for a while?
that is correct. I'm 35 years old, and I first read Marie-Louise von Franz's lectures on Jungian typology when I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
So that's what really got me into it. So it's been about 20 years now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, did you read any Young after that and stuff? Because I heard you talking about Young a
Oh,
lot.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think I was always, I mean, probably around the same age, 13, 14, is when a good family friend of mine gave me some books by Jung. I think Memories, Dreams, Reflections was the first one. And my mom was a therapist, and so always had books of his around. And so I would look at Man and His Symbols, and I would look at kind of Jungian books, not really understanding them. But probably around 12, 13, 14 is when I really started to get interested. I was a really precocious reader. I was hyperlexic as a kid, so I started reading pretty well at age 3 or 4. I had a college level vocabulary by age 7. I mean,
Right.
I had kind of a weird relationship with books. I used to read the dictionary just for hours. I would read the dictionary, and I had a pretty photographic memory when I was younger for what page numbers different words were on and things like that. So, which was always something that was weird. I lost that to a degree. But that's why I was so surprised. We'll have to get into my type and
Yeah, yeah.
OP.
What did you think you were? What type did you think you were before you got to OP?
Well, so okay, so I've been typed. I mean, I still think I'm the same type that I thought
Okay.
that I was when I
Oh,
learned
okay.
OP.
You didn't change
But
at all, or
that did not. Okay, my self-assessment of my type did not change. What was really interesting to me though is that my understanding of consume and my relationship to the animal consume, which for those who don't know a lot of OP, consume is the combination of an introverted judging function with an extroverted perceiving function. And consume is something that I would have thought that I was really, really good at because I read so much.
right?
And I was just voraciously reading. And, but then what I would read would be extremely narrow. Like I would read a single information source to its end. And I had a really hard time. I was so resistant to changing information sources.
Right.
So like Jung was my life for many years. And I could read von Franz because she was the disciple of Jung. But
Right.
I totally rejected James Hillman for like 15 years because he was a post-Jungian who differentiated himself from Jung. But I don't want to kind of get ahead too much. I
Yeah,
guess I would
yeah.
just say that. So I was reading a lot of Jung. Jung for me got me through high school. I could not have survived. I was so like alienated. I had a really bad speech impediment as a kid, so I really didn't have any social life much. I was really nerdy and into Dungeons and Dragons, and I had a couple close friends that I would sit around and play Dungeons and Dragons with for hours. Then I got really into computers, so I would just isolate myself, and my mom had to actually, give me a certain amount of time, like per day, I could be on the computer, or I would have just been on the computer for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. And
Right.
I was started programming around age 12, maybe even a little earlier. I was writing C when I was 12 years old. Started getting really serious into game development at 13, 14. So Jung was kind of this author that I could read, this writer who just made so much sense to me and really helped me with feelings of isolation and loneliness and being alienated and just like I think high school is hard for everyone, but for me in
Where,
particular, I felt
just a curiosity, where did they put your blast in? Okay, so let's get into what they typed you. Dave and Shannon
okay.
typed
So
you.
my official type, according to Dave and Shannon, is masculine, feminine. So MF, masculine, sensory, feminine, extroverted decider or judging function. And then they typed me as an NEFI, so the ENFP,
Right.
extroverted, intuitive, introverted feeling. And they put me as lead consume with auxiliary play, tertiary blast, and missing sleep.
Okay. Okay. I got you. Yeah, because I'm noticing your blast isn't bad at all. Your blast is pretty decent.
But my blast is also scattered and all over the place, which is why they said it was third, and that the
Right.
scatteredness they're attributing to extrovert intuition. However, in my defense, I think that I have double feminine blast, and that feminine introverted intuition with feminine extroverted thinking. Like, I actually see my blast is not that different from Dave's blast when you see him in an interview, which is so different from the classes or when he's with Shannon or when he's
Right.
prepared thing. When he's in an interview, or I also met Dave in person and we talked for hours. I mean, and I see Dave's double feminine blast doing the same thing of kind of, we start talking about one thing and then it reminds us of something else and it reminds us of something else. And that sort of
Yeah.
scattered, moving from one thing to the next, they said, well, that is your classic hallmark of extroverted intuition. You're obviously an extroverted intuitive.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Is what
That's what
they
they're
said.
saying.
No,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
disagree though, but that's what they said.
But your
And
yeah,
I'm like,
your blast is obviously like pretty strong because like I ask you about one thing and then you just take off and you go into like a completely different direction and start talking about Dungeons and Dragons and your computers and stuff.
well, yeah, but because I'm trying to give context, and I think
Yeah,
that
yeah, I
really
know. Yeah,
that
I know.
I'm starting on one little thing, and then I have to keep being like,
Yeah.
but wait a
No,
minute,
but I mean
for that
like
to make sense,
if you
you
had
need
a
to go
low
out.
blast, you would just answer the question and then like I'd have to like keep pulling stuff out of you. Like I interview not a lot of people, but I interview quite a few. And like some people you really have to extract the information and with you it's just like, oh, all right, so it's going to be an easy job today.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. I hope so. I hope so. But I am very self conscious about it because I also, in the back of my head, no matter how far I go out, I really want to come back to it. So I'm always like, okay, but bringing it back to your question, and it's
Right.
frustrating to me sometimes. I also, my version of my reason for why I experience this frustration of having an overload of things to say and maybe not really formulating them. To me, I'm actually very critical of my blast. But part of that, I think, is the variant of push versus pull, because I claim to have um, push blast. Now, are you familiar with these terms at all? Push and pull?
Not yet, but you go into it and then we'll talk about it
Yeah,
after. We'll figure it
I'll
out.
just briefly go into it because I think it's topical. It's relevant. So Thomas Alott, who's a member of the class and just a brilliant type
Yeah, yeah, I
researcher.
interviewed him. Yep.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. I caught some of that. It was really good. It was really good.
Yeah, you texted him in the middle of the interview.
Oh, I need to watch that again to see that. That's so
Yeah.
funny. But no, but so I think Thomas is just absolutely brilliant. And he coined the terms push and pull to describe the two variants of each animal. So say you have NT blast. NT blast is always going to have introverted intuition and extroverted thinking in one order or the other. So if you're an INTJ, you're going to have NI first with TE second. But if you're an ENTJ, you're going to have TE first and NI second, right?
Yeah,
These are
yeah.
so Thomas Alott coined the term push for when you have an observer first. You have a perceiving function first, so you have an overabundance of perceptions that you're trying to get out, and
Right.
in the case of blast, and then the TE is having a really hard time keeping up. And that's part of my description for myself compared to like an ENTJ who would have pull variant of blast,
Right.
where their TE is constraining what they let out. They're limiting the amount of observations. It's like it's restrictive. And because I don't have that restriction, I can kind of talk like at an avalanche of observations, and it's like, but wait a minute, this is more observation, more observation, more observation.
Right.
And I hear Dave do the same thing. I watched part of his interview with Megan Levoda, and I saw the same thing of just he has one observation after the next, and he's jumping from thing to thing, but they're all kind of related. He's not changing topics. I mean, he is a little bit, but he's giving more context for the topics he is choosing to discuss.
Do you see
So,
yourself as also control over chaos?
oh, well, yes, and that was something that was very new to me, and that I rejected quite a bit when I first got into objective personality. My kind of what I've realized, and partly this is because of realizing how consume works, is that I actually thought of myself as much more open-minded and much more flexible and adaptable to a degree than I realize I am now after learning objective personality. So I'm very thankful for that, because even in the example of control versus chaos, when I was first exposed to objective personality, I was like, I'm not controlling at all. I'm the least controlling person you'll meet. I'm so permissive. I'm so this, I'm so that. And then, but I started to realize that that the word that I was understanding, the meaning that I had for the word control was not, I was saying, oh, I'm so permissive because, I have a very laissez-faire attitude about a lot of things in life where I kind of just let people be free to be themselves. And it's almost, maybe it's the self over tribe thing is what I was conflating it with.
Right. Right. Do you see yourself as self over tribe?
We both agree that I'm self over tribe. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
nice that both.
I agree too. That's something that I'm noticing. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And that made a lot of sense to me because I've had this kind of ethos of personal empowerment and freedom to be yourself and all of this stuff that I really highly cherish and value. And
So
so,
you agree on FI?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you the points of our divergence momentarily. So,
Right.
but
Yeah.
as far as the control thing, there was my friends made a little zine for me where they made caricatures of me. And it was really sweet because when somebody makes caricatures of you, they really get to make fun of certain aspects of you that maybe they see very clearly that you might not see about yourself. And one of the caricatures of me was freaking out because, and there's something I actually did. I had a nice scotch and my friend was mixing the scotch with like Coca-Cola or something. And I was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. Like, and I was just like,
yeah,
like, why would you, like, oh, you can't, like, and so it was a caricature of me like bursting a blood vessel in my forehead about somebody. Now,
is this a reoccurring theme? Is this something that comes back to haunt you every so often?
It's a reoccurring now. I mean, I don't know about if the sensory control is that, especially control of other people. I feel like that might have been a little bit of a rarity, but it is because
things, not necessarily people, but like things. Like if your computer is not working.
No, I definitely, I had to. Okay, I get really, really frustrated, mostly with myself when things are damaged, or when things don't go right, or when somebody damages something of mine, or
what about plans? What about plans? If you have a plan, do you?
Oh yeah, no. This is really, no. You're absolutely right about that, and this is something where I really did realize the control thing was real because I realized. I remember particularly the day I realized it was maybe about 6 months ago, and I was with my friend who got me into objective personality, and we were going out with a group of people to go to a picnic, and I had in my mind the place that I wanted to have the picnic because I knew the best place. It was the best. It was the one single vision, and then we ended up going somewhere else, and I was so frustrated, and I didn't say anything. I just kept it all inside, and they were like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Well, I wanted to go over here, but I'm like, well, that's too far away, though. We don't want to walk to that place." And it's like, oh, this is no. It's a continual thing. Yeah, absolutely. I get so bent out of shape about plans. And so that was actually something that was really nice learning objective personalities, that I didn't realize any of that about myself. And I never would have said that introverted intuition is controlling. And in fact, I would have said that someone like the ESTJ would be a really controlling type. I would have probably associated control with extra
well, it's a difference between tribe control. Yeah. Tribe control is like masculine, extroverted decider is like a tribe controller type person.
Right, and that's what I was thinking of control. Right. So I would read like INTJs are controlling, and I would think, because that's the type that I type myself as an INTJ jumper, and I would say, no, I'm not controlling at all. What are you talking about? But then when I dug deeper into it, it's like, oh no, my plan's getting thwarted. Like for me, and it does kind of tie into some of my preliminary. I was able to integrate it with my knowledge that I had previous to objective personality, which is simply that the extroverted perceiving functions are very adaptable. They're very adaptable, because that was something that I had realized before, was that an ESFP or an ESTP, for instance, can adapt to change, or an ENTP or an ENFP can adapt more or less. And I had, for some years, maybe 5 or 6 years, identified as somebody who was kind of hindered in my ability to adapt. And I remember being in my 20s, because I think a lot of my personality type understanding changed right around the time I hit 30, maybe around 28 to 30. But I remember being in my 20s and really thinking that extroverted sensing types were kind of vapid. They would be having a lot of different relationships and things like that. And there's almost this kind of resentment, jealousy that the introverted intuitive has for particularly extroverted sensation types. And then I had this realization that no, they're not vapid. They're just very quick to invest and quick to disinvest. And it's actually adaptable. And it was an amazing realization for me. It was this epiphany. it was very healing because I was able to embrace kind of my own shadow SE to a better degree, because I had been hating and rejecting this kind of thing, going, how is it you have a different girlfriend every 2 weeks? How are you able to just quit your job and start a new job? How can you move to a new city like that? And I was being
Right.
so critical of that, not realizing that there was so much jealousy and resentment because that was something that I had the hardest time with.
So
You know, I was in a relationship for
describe a
8
little
years.
bit your
Same job.
your FI for me, just so we can get an idea of how your FI expresses itself.
So, okay, well, I identify as an NIFI type. So that was interesting because I identified as the INTJ FI subtype for many years before discovering objective personality, before objective personality was even released, because I was practicing kind of my own version of subtyping. So for a while, I identified as INTJ FI subtype.
Right.
And my reasoning for that was that I always felt more like an NF than an NT. Now, I'm a software developer and I do software development. And, you know, I was in chess team in high school and really good at chess and all these things. I mean, I do a lot of NT nerdy things and
Right.
video games and all that. But I always felt that the NF temperament, that I was pretty in touch with my values and what was important to me, and also that, you know, I felt, but I did, and I still do think that even the INTJ jumper. Here's an interesting little side point, because I still feel that my FI is not as developed as someone who has auxiliary FI in the traditional Myers-Briggs cognitive stack. I feel like the
Okay.
jumpers are jumping to their third function. It's not that FI is my second function, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because I feel that my FI is still a bit childlike, in that there have been key moments in my life where I've recognized kind of almost upgrades in my awareness of FI or my relationship to it. So for instance, one of them was when I want to say like around 29, 30, somewhere in there, I realized that FI can be about saying no to things. It's like having integrity and saying no to things that don't align with your values. And that was something I've always been terrible at. So I almost, in a way, I feel like I've been this FI type, but it's kind of like a childlike, immature, stunted growth
Is it
FI.
feminine? Is it feminine FI?
Oh, it's well, no, we both agree it's masculine.
Masculine.
Because when I'm describing all this with my extroverted thinking, I'm being very careful and cautious. I don't want to offend people. I'm
Right.
considerate. I'm thinking, are there FI users out there who are going to be hurt by what I'm saying about this? So,
Okay.
you know, it's masculine. The other way I could tell that it's masculine is because, and this is something that we disagree about, because I say that I'm an INTJ jumper, they say that I'm an ENFP. So Dave and Shan disagree with me about this, but I believe that I have double masculine consume. And so I believe that most of the time what I'm showing the world is the double feminine blast, that I'm actually coming across very, you know, careful, considerate, gentle, concerned. You know, like if I disagree with somebody, I'll say, well, you know, I don't really see it that way, and stuff like that. But there's particular times where I go into consume mode, where I come across like a Wild West cowboy is the only way I can explain it. This total machismo comes out, and I'm suddenly like not giving anyone anything, and I'm very stone-faced. I'm not smiling. I can't really do it now because I'm blasting. That's the thing. Like I'm
Yeah.
blasting,
Yeah.
so I can almost do an impression of it. But I've noticed myself go into it. Like if somebody almost like triggers me into it, and then suddenly I just become this total tough guy, and everyone's like, "Where the hell did that come from? I've never seen that." I got that way when kind of a friend of a friend some years ago was flirting with my other friend who's married, and she's married and her husband wasn't there, and he tried to give her a back rub, and I just said, if Vaughn sees that, he'll throw you out the window, you know. And I
Yeah.
was serious. The guy starts to laugh, and I go, no, you get your hands off her, you know. And I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like very like, because I'm
Right.
observing, I'm like pushy, and I
It
won't
sounds like
budge.
it went against your masculine FI
It
then too.
it totally violated my values. Like you absolutely have to
Yeah.
respect people's loving commitments to each other. And you know, if I see something like that, like it triggers me into this like very macho mode that I normally don't like, and I normally, you know, detest, you know, that kind of, you know, that attitude. But every now and then, I mean, I guess, you know, it's just so I've gone into it in that way. I've gone into it. Yeah, it's usually around, yeah, when a really strong value, and not just like some petty FI value, like someone doesn't like the band I like or something. I won't, you know, I'm not going to go into it for that. But if something like, if somebody's being, you know, if I see sexual assault, or if I see something that goes against, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
my,
your values. Yeah, yeah.
or peer pressuring or something, like I'm really against peer pressure. That's probably
Tell
one of
me,
my,
telling me about how often do you think about your past? How often do you try to remember your past and go over things that have happened to you in your life? And is that something that you do automatically, or something after something happens traumatic? Or
no, I mean, I feel like, um, I track when my perspective changes. So my past is punctuated by key moments where I have certain realizations, and those realizations or perspective changes, um, you know, I can remember back when I was 8 years old and I fell and skinned my knee, and then I started to cry, and I looked around and nobody was around, and then I stopped crying, and I remember the exact moment I realized that
yeah,
my crying was linked to some performance to other people being
performance to
there,
other people. Yeah.
you know, and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, I don't actually have to cry. So that's just one example. But, you know, even in this conversation where I'm going back, I'm kind of like, I remember being 28 years old and remembering and realizing for the first time that extroverted sensing people actually are just highly adaptable.
What
Or
about like yeah. What
so
about
I
like
remember 6 months ago. So I guess here's what I'm saying. I don't necessarily like nostalgically, wistfully remember my first kiss. In fact, I don't remember my first kiss.
right?
So I don't nostalgically like, and I don't get overwhelmed by bouts of nostalgia or longing for the past, which is something that I've identified in a lot of ENFPs and ENTPs, so that they'll kind of, particularly, I guess, if they have low sleep, will be like pushing down SI, and then they'll be overwhelmed by it, and they'll suddenly be like, I got a text message today from an ENTP I know, very nostalgic, and I could tell that she's in this totally wistful mode, and she's like overwhelmed by her like demon SI wistfulness. And, you know, so I don't really experience that. I do, my version of the demon thing is to go into sensory binges, but my relationship to the past is generally just that I'm continually, I think I pretty much digest things as they happen. I don't spend a lot of time. I mean, I do a lot of internal comparison. Like, I just got back from Seattle. I live in Santa Fe now, and I moved to Santa Fe after living in Seattle for 25 years, because I'm definitely the kind of person who has always been very afraid of change, and comfortable with the familiar, afraid to move. I didn't go on vacation for like 9 years straight. Never would go anywhere, despite having all the ability in the world to do it. You know, the financial ability, the work ability, everything. People would push me, and I wouldn't. And then finally, after a couple of years, I just got up the nerve, after a couple of years of buildup, and I moved to Santa Fe, which is the most terrifying thing I could do because it was so different. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really big deal for me. So I just got back from a trip to Seattle for 2 weeks, and absolutely the whole time I was there, I was making mental comparisons, not really of wistfulness of like, oh, I remember this place or this thing, but more like, how does my perspective change here? What are the differences and almost the essences of who I am as the person when I'm in Seattle versus in Santa Fe? You know,
Mhm.
am I more career oriented here and more land of mañana in Santa Fe? Am I more, you know, this here and that there? And I was really doing a lot of mental modeling and comparison of how my perspective shifts depending on my environment, but it wasn't nostalgic. So I don't know if that
Yeah, yeah.
answers the
So
question.
so, but you're talking about like you're thinking more about external things, less about your feelings and things like that, less about your values.
Um, yeah,
When
I
you're
mean,
doing
because I
that,
just take
yeah.
those for granted so much. I mean, I think part of it is that I've never really had much of a identity crisis or a crisis of direction in life.
Right.
So a lot of times people will say, well, I just really thought I wanted to be this, and then I decided I wanted to be that. Or, you know, I think I'm going to go back to school to become this. Or, you know what, I think my true calling is that. I've never had those kind of realizations. I've just kind of taken it for granted that I think I'm, you know, this might sound a little arrogant, but my explanation for it is that I'm so in touch with my values, I don't have to reflect on them as much.
What about like structure in your life? What about like lists and planning and things like that? Like structured plans, I don't know,
Mm,
routines.
well, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have, okay, a routine. That's a good question. It's it's hard for me to context switch. So my routines are pretty much limited to particular context that I'm in, where I'll do the same thing the same way every time as an efficiency, but it's much more pragmatic. Um, so, okay. And even this is a little bit tricky. I see I got a little bit discombobulated because I'm so much on the previous question still, and I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
going to
yeah.
go into the distinctions of NT and ST
It's just
sleep
I
and
want to
SF
keep this
sleep.
short because like we're
No, no,
almost out
no,
of
I know, I
time.
know.
Yeah.
No, this is really good. This is really good though to
Okay.
switch. Yeah. So, but so just to change topics over to this one, I would say that I definitely lack the energy to follow routines a lot. Where I'll have a friend, a couple of my friends who are lead play, for instance, who jump out of bed and the first thing they do in the morning is they like go and like they just have like all their stuff that they do, and it's just amazing to me how much they get done by the time I'm like still,
Right.
slowly adjusting. My thing, I do have routines, but my routines are not very demanding. Like my routine is I get up in the morning. I typically do not like to have any phone call, any conversation, or any reading on the internet or any consumption whatsoever for at least an hour. So my routine is usually I'll go for a walk. I'll get
Okay.
dressed. I'll kind of like slowly think and reflect. I'll think about the previous day. I'll kind of think of what I have to do this day. I'll mentally model and prepare. Like my routine this morning was I played out a conversation I was going to have with you for about 45 minutes. No, seriously, in my head, I just thought
Yeah,
about all
that's
the
why you're so ready
questions.
now because you're not even
And,
you're just talking about the conversation you're having in your head. You're not.
well, I don't mean to not be present, but then I'll go for a walk and I'll usually walk to my cafe. I have my favorite cafe and I'll get my coffee. And that's the first social interaction I have. And it's really nice. And
Right.
I mean, it's not like I don't like social interaction. It's actually very sweet. And I do really enjoy it because I like seeing the familiar faces there. Familiarity makes me feel really good. Like
Okay.
if I don't recognize people and I'm in a weird situation, I get kind of like paranoid and frightened. And so I go to my cafe and I get my coffee and I usually go home and then I usually by that time, I'll have thought about all the stuff I have to do. It'll be kind of queued up, and then
Right.
I'll start executing on
Right. And okay, so what about boredom? Do you like is it easy for you to sit on your hands and do nothing or like you always need to keep busy?
it. Yeah, I have never gotten bored, and it's like the most foreign concept in the world to me is boredom. Like I
Okay.
walked the other day. I actually ended up walking close to 10 miles, which I didn't realize, and I didn't have my phone, and I didn't have anything, and I just was in my head the entire time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I won't say it was heavenly because it's just so normal, but it was necessary because I felt a little bit like I get overwhelmed sometimes, and I have to do that in order to. I mean, I'm doing it as I go, but like if I have like house guests or visitors or something, and like I don't get enough me time, then I just start to get really kind of weird, and so it's funny because I don't want to come across like I'm overvaluing sleep because I don't value it. It's kind of just an automatic thing. And I've had EP friends with missing sleep say, "Oh my God, I just went on a 10-mile walk and it was the most amazing thing." And, because for
Mhm.
them, it's such a rare thing. But for me, it's more just like, it's just kind of an automatic defense mechanism. I feel like when I get overwhelmed, that's my normal. And if I don't do that, I go in the opposite extreme and I go into sense binges. And I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but I used to like chain smoke and then like eat a bunch of ice cream and then drink a bunch of booze. And then, so I would kind of go on these different extremes. So it's almost like my self-care routine. Like my self-care is like stretching, going on long walks, going to my music studio and making music for hours. Although I think that's more blast. I feel like when I'm in my like zone, and I'm more in a blast zone.
Yeah.
But no,
Okay.
I never get bored. I don't know anything about boredom. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, I want to keep this short. Maybe just a couple more questions. What about your intuition? Can you just describe what like without thinking of is it NI or any? Just kind of describe Jonah Dempsey's intuition. How does Jonah Dempsey's intuition work?
I mean, it's hard to not put it through a lens, but I'll just say that
Yeah.
I've always been really opinionated and made assumptions really, really quick and jumped to conclusions. And people continually tell me not to make so many assumptions, but then in this almost weirdly like macho way, I will challenge myself to make the assumption with as little information as possible. And then when I'm right, I'll be like, see, I told you so. And since learning OP, I realized that part of that is that it's really hard for me to gather information. And so I need to not jump to conclusions so quickly. but it's just so automatic. It's like the second I meet somebody, almost always I have a pretty good idea of all this different stuff about them, and a pretty good guess of like what their personality type is. Like I just, I just don't, it's hard for me to not jump to conclusions. So my intuition is just, I would just say, very quick, off the cuff assumptions, making a ton of assumptions and operating on little to no information at all. And basically like operating in the dark. I see it as an instrument that just operates completely in the dark to make assumptions. And
how hard is it for you when those assumptions turn out to be wrong, or do they ever?
No, they are. It's oftentimes hard for me to realize that they're wrong, and it's not for many years until I realize it. And then when I do, I have to go back to the drawing board and like change the whole system.
So
And
many things that were based on those assumptions, I guess, that kept
exactly.
developing.
So I had typed like 4 people I knew as ENFP, and I changed all 4 at the same moment to ESFJ because I realized they were Enneagram 7, and I was always like unsettled by my ENFP assessment of them because I'm like, well, I'm not really seeing FI, and they seem to have this really good FE, but are they like faking it? But they're definitely not ESFJs because this and this and this. But it turns out they actually were ESFJs. They were just Enneagram 7, and so it's such a weird combination for me that I wasn't used to it and didn't.
And so, how sure are you now that they're ESFJs, or maybe you're wrong about that too?
I mean, I'm positive. Well, I'm always positive, but there's always something going wrong. But I never actually think that that's a possibility.
Interesting.
And that's one of the problems is that I definitely have been in touch with my arrogance or self-confidence that can turn into narcissism if I'm not careful, because my instinct is to say it's impossible I'm wrong, but then there've been a lot of times when I've been impossible that I could be wrong, that I actually was wrong. So that's the problem, is that I continually have this feeling of being right. I'm also an Enneagram 1, or I self-identify as Enneagram 1, I should say.
Okay.
And Enneagram 1, which, by the way, I don't think there are any ENFP Enneagram 1s. So that's another contraindicator to Dave and Shannon's, unless they think I'm a different Enneagram type. But the Enneagram 1, for those unfamiliar with it, really, really, really has to be right all the time. They get so angry when people are wrong, and they are so vindictive and vengeful, and their growth is to stop trying to be right all the time and to listen to others more and to stop like being a know-it-all, basically.
Great. Wow, Jonah, it was really awesome meeting you. I want to cut it short because attention spans of people today and stuff. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Jonah Dempsey has a YouTube channel. Check it out, and I'll put a link in the description. And for sure, we'll keep in touch. You got a lot to say. I got a lot to hear. You got a lot. Yeah.
You got a lot to say too. So I
cool,
really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.